Picture this: London, June 1381. The cobblestone streets that usually echoed with the gentle footsteps of merchants and nobles now trembled under the thunderous march of the oppressed. But this wasn't just any rebellion. This was the day when the fair maidens of London, the women who had been silenced, taxed, and forgotten, finally said enough. If you're enjoying this untold story of courage, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning wood. England had been bleeding its people dry. 3 poll taxes in just 4 years had pushed the common folk to their breaking point. But what the nobles didn't expect was that among the rebels storming through London's gates were women, brave, determined women who would change the course of English history forever. Let me tell you about Johanna Ferrour. Court documents would later brand her as the chief perpetrator and leader of rebellious evildoers from Kent. But to understand her story, we need to go back to where it all began, not in London's grand palaces, but in the humble villages of Kent and Essex, where ordinary people faced extraordinary desperation. The Black Death had ravaged England 40 years earlier, killing 1/3 of the population. Those who survived found themselves in a world turned upside down. Labor was scarce, which meant workers could demand better wages. But the nobility weren't about to let their power slip away so easily. They passed laws freezing wages at pre-plague levels, essentially trapping the survivors in poverty while the rich got richer. Then came the poll taxes, not just once but 3 times in 4 years. Unlike other taxes that were based on wealth or property, the poll tax demanded the same amount from everyone, rich or poor, lord or peasant. Imagine a world where a nobleman's wife and a farmer's daughter both had to pay the exact same crushing tax, regardless of their ability to pay. The women of medieval England weren't just bystanders in this suffering. They worked the fields, managed households, raised children, and contributed to every aspect of society. Yet they had no voice in Parliament, no say in the taxes that were destroying their families. The very people who kept England running were being taxed into starvation. But on that fateful spring day in 1381, something snapped. In Essex, when tax collectors arrived demanding payment, the people refused. It started as a whisper of defiance, but whispers have a way of becoming roars when enough voices join in. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world who appreciate real history. The rebellion spread like wildfire across the southeastern counties, and leading the charge from Kent was Johanna Ferrour. We don't know much about her background. Medieval records rarely bothered with the details of common women's lives, but we know she commanded respect and inspired fierce loyalty among the rebels. Picture her, a woman in a time when society demanded female silence and submission, now standing before crowds of angry peasants, her voice cutting through the chaos with words of defiance and hope. She wasn't just calling for tax relief, she was demanding a complete transformation of English society. As the rebels gathered momentum, they began marching toward London. Thousands of men and women carrying makeshift weapons, fueled by decades of oppression and the immediate crisis of impossible taxes. They came from Canterbury, they came from Maidstone, they came from villages whose names have been lost to time, all converging on the greatest city in England. June 13th, 1381. The rebels reached London's gates. The city that had seemed so impenetrable, so secure in its power, suddenly found itself face to face with an army of the dispossessed, and Johanna Ferrour was among those leading the charge. The rebels didn't just storm into London, they transformed it. They threw open the prisons, freeing those who had been locked away for minor debts or petty crimes. They burned government buildings that housed the records of their oppression, but their most audacious act was yet to come. They breached the Tower of London itself. The Tower of London had never fallen to rebels before. This massive fortress, symbol of royal power, seemed utterly impregnable. Yet on this day, led by figures like Johanna Ferrour, the rebels poured through its gates. They found Archbishop Simon Sudbury, the Lord Chancellor who had helped impose the hated poll tax, cowering in the tower's chapel. What happened next shocked medieval England to its core. The rebels dragged Sudbury from his sanctuary and executed him, along with Robert Hales, the treasurer. Johanna Ferrour wasn't just present for these executions. According to court records, she ordered them. A woman, in an age when women were expected to be silent and obedient, had just commanded the death of some of the most powerful men in England. But the rebels' most symbolic victory was storming the royal apartments themselves. They burst into the king's own chambers, sat on his bed, and demanded that the Queen Mother kiss them, a complete reversal of the social order that had oppressed them for so long. Young King Richard II, just 14 years old, was forced to meet with the rebels. Imagine the scene: the teenage monarch, surrounded by his terrified advisors, facing thousands of armed peasants led by figures like Wat Tyler, and supported by women like Johanna Ferrour, who had proven they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. The rebels presented their demands, and they were revolutionary for their time. They wanted an end to serfdom, the system that bound people to the land like property. They demanded fair wages and the right to buy and sell freely. They called for the execution of corrupt officials and the distribution of church wealth to the poor. Richard II, perhaps sensing the genuine danger to his throne, agreed to their demands. He issued charters promising freedom and pardons. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like the fair maidens and brave men of London had achieved the impossible, a complete transformation of English society through the power of collective action. But revolutions are fragile things, and the nobles weren't about to surrender their centuries of privilege without a fight. The end came at Smithfield, during a second meeting between the king and the rebel leaders. Wat Tyler, the most visible leader of the revolt, was struck down and killed by William Walworth, the mayor of London. With their most prominent leader dead and royal promises proving hollow, the rebellion began to crumble. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The nobles, once they felt secure again, began hunting down the rebel leaders. The charters Richard II had issued were declared invalid. The pardons were revoked. One by one, those who had dared to challenge the established order faced the executioner's block. Johanna Ferrour's fate remains unclear in historical records, as was often the case with women in medieval England. Her story disappears from official accounts once the rebellion was crushed. But her brief moment in history illuminates something remarkable. In an age when women were expected to be invisible, she became a leader who commanded armies and toppled the powerful. The Peasants Revolt of 1381 failed in its immediate goals. Serfdom continued for centuries more. The poll taxes were eventually abandoned, but new forms of oppression took their place. Yet the rebellion planted seeds that would eventually bloom into the democratic ideals we recognize today. Before we wrap up, make sure you've subscribed to the channel. We've got so many more incredible historical stories coming your way. The fair maidens of London may not have won their revolution, but they proved something that would echo through the centuries. When ordinary people, including those society expects to remain silent, decide they've had enough, they can shake the very foundations of power. Johanna Ferrour and the women who stood with her didn't just participate in history, they shaped it. Their courage reminds us that progress isn't handed down from above. It's fought for from below, by people whose names we might never know, but whose sacrifices light the path toward a more just world. The Tower of London still stands today, but it can never erase the memory of that June day when the fair maidens of London proved that even the mightiest fortresses can fall when justice demands it.